Okay, so let's get started. We're running a bit late, but it's okay. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this Python meetup thing that we have going on. My name is Sebastian, and I'm going to present this little talk on how we can run Python, and specifically Django using Azure, and also developing Python applications using Visual Studio. So my name is Sebastian. I work as a technical evangelist for Microsoft. I'm responsible for application and web development in Denmark. So all these things that Microsoft is doing with the community, such as events like this, I'm responsible for that. I really love strongly typed languages, so that's why I'm here, right? But I sort of have an affair with some dynamic mistresses, such as JavaScript and Python. I'm on Twitter, and you can follow me there if you're interested in that. My handle is SebastianBK, and I also have a blog where I normally upload my talks and my screen recordings from these presentations that I give. So, but let's get to it. First of all, I want to sort of set the scene and explain why I'm here. Like, why is Microsoft interested in Python, and why should Python developers be interested in what Microsoft has to offer? I'll give an introduction to the main theme of today, which will be Microsoft Azure, and then I'll give demos. So first of all, I'll explain why Windows loves Python, then I'll explain why Visual Studio loves Python, then I'll explain how Microsoft Azure loves Python, and then I'll explain how Visual Studio Online loves Python. We'll go through all these steps. And then in the end, I'll wrap it up, and I'll ask the question, Python and Microsoft, is that sort of like Lady and the Tramp, you know, that love story made by Disney, the two dogs? Well, we'll get to that. So first of all, I'll ask the question, what is Microsoft Azure? Do people know that? Yeah? So what is it? A cloud. Ooh. What kind of cloud?
Software as a service, for example. Platform as a service.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. So I think many cloud providers, they differentiate between the different types of cloud services that you can offer. So there exist software as a service offerings such as Dropbox and Salesforce and all these ready-made software as a service products that are readily usable by normal users. And we've got these platform as a service offerings, which is sort of a thing in between complete software as a service offerings and then the bare infrastructure. We'll look at examples of that today, and then we sort of have the bare infrastructure, virtual machines running in the cloud, right? So in fact,
how many, just the percentage of Linux machines and Windows machines running in Azure, is that percentage?
So I don't know if it's an official statistic, but I'll say it anyway because all you guys are so sweet, right? So it's about 20% of all the Azure workloads right now running on Ubuntu, right? And we're actually focusing on increasing that number even more for some weird reason, right?
Of course.
And so when I'm speaking to my colleagues internally and the people that work in the product groups in Microsoft, it seems like all they're focused on is this open source world, Docker being one thing that's really big right now. Of course, we still think that the primary experience or the premium experience, you'll only get that if you use Windows. But if you, for some reason, think that these open source things are cooler, well, you can go ahead with that. So Azure, other than being a cloud, it's actually 19 data centers all around the world, and we're working on getting more and more into our network of data centers around the world. That's a lot more than Amazon Web Services, just so you know, okay? Each data center building is about the size of a football field, where you can park 2 jumbo jets. And then each data center then consists of 16 of these. And that means that we can run about 600,000 servers per Azure region, and you can multiply that by 19. So it's by far one of the largest clouds in the world, and the only real competitor out there, I believe, is Amazon Web Services, but I guess you all know that. So cloud computing, as I said before, we sort of differentiate between the three categories. So we have sort of the traditional workloads we can run up there, infrastructure as a service, where we basically just get a virtual machine. We don't have to care about, or we don't have to worry about the actual hardware or the networking or the disks running on the machines or the power supply or all that kind of stuff. That infrastructure, we receive that as a service, hence the name. And there's sort of the second type of cloud services, platform as a service, and that's basically building a little bit on top of infrastructure as a service. So we get the same things as with IaaS or IaaS, but we get some software installed on top that makes it a little easier for us as application developers to build stuff on top of it. And we'll actually use one of these. We'll use a product that falls into that category when we go through the demos today. And then we've got the software as a service applications. I guess most of you, or at least many of you, develop software as a service applications in your day jobs, right? And with the goal to consume that, of course, right? Azure also covers an extensive set of service level agreements. We've got a 95.95 SLA, and there's an economic compensation if we don't hold that. It means that we have about 4.3 hours of downtime per year. And so that includes if hardware fails, or if there's data center failure, or network failure, power failure, or if we're upgrading hardware or doing software maintenance, all that counts as downtime, right? Yeah. So you could sort of categorize the services that we have inside of Azure into 3 boxes. One is app services that you would typically use when you're building an application, whether that is a web application or a native application running on a mobile device. And we have these data services that are expanding a lot right now, and we have the core infrastructure services. What we typically see is that the larger companies that already have an infrastructure in place on premises or at a hosting provider locally in the country they're from, well, they sort of opt more for the infrastructure services that we offer in the cloud. Whereas people like you, or I can imagine people like you, or at least startups or smaller companies, they opt for the app services because you get so much more out of the box, and it's so much easier to just focus on what you're actually in this world for, just building your application, right? So if you were to build an app, for example, a web app, you might want to use some caching, the identity services we have in Azure, maybe use a cloud service. I'll explain all of this, and then maybe some table storage, which is basically a key value store hosted in Azure. Or if you're building, or if you want to move your current data center, if you're a larger company, you already have a data center, you might want to use some of the more core infrastructure services that we have, and then maybe connect that through VPN to your on-premises data center. So we see all these different kinds of usages of the cloud, and I'm saying this to sort of emphasize that this exists and it's possible, but what I'll be focusing on in my demo is sort of the top layer of services we saw in the previous slide. As I said before, we have this global presence. Since we are in Denmark, there are two regions that are a little more interesting for us: North Europe, which is placed in Ireland, and then West Europe, which is placed in Amsterdam. Right. We have some service goals that are sort of the core values or the core goals of the Azure platform, and it's to make it useful, make it responsive, attractive, and cost effective. And I think these goals, if you keep them in mind, and when I'm going through my demos, this will become really apparent when I'm going through the demos here. Performance is obviously key, so the more load time, or if the load time of your application rises, then it means a fall in users, which means a fall in revenue. And we as Microsoft understand that, and that's why it's one of our main priorities to keep this whole thing up and running, right? There are some statistics about how every second counts, but I think I'll just skip this. I'm sure you understand the importance of uptime. I want to just say one thing before we actually try to make sense of all these slides by going into the demos, and that is in traditional setups, or if you have your own data center or if you're using infrastructure services from cloud providers, whether that is Azure, Amazon Web Services, or another cloud provider, you would typically have to do this thing with scaling on your own. So the more users you get, the more you need to scale your infrastructure, and that's typically, or at least for many companies, that is a manual process. And typically you have something in place where you have a fixed set of resources and your demand sort of goes up and down, and then that yellow area here really represents the unused resources. Then when your demand goes up, you need to be quick to ensure that your max capacity follows that, maybe by adding another server to your setup. And then you raise the bar, but that just means that you have even more unused resources. So what if you could actually build, or if you could sort of implement an elastic way of scaling your application. So rather than having this fixed max capacity, you would have a max capacity just a little over your actual demand, and your unused resources would be much less. This is something I'm going to show you in concrete how to do that inside of Azure. So moving to the cloud, speed, scale, economics. Let's not dive too much into that. Let's just get to it. Let me just say one thing before we actually jump into the fun stuff. Azure covers so many things, and the list of things you can do up there, the list of services, just grows by the hour, right? So BizTalk is still alive. Are you working with BizTalk?
No, thanks.
Yeah, no thanks. Yeah. But some crazy people still work with that, right? Yeah. Anyway, we've got so much up there, and honestly, it's hard to stay an expert on Azure because there's just too much stuff.
And you have like 80,000 people pushing things up there all the time, right?
Yeah,
something like that.
Well, I don't know the number, but there's a lot of people working on this. So let me just take things from the bottom. We've talked about Azure so far. Let me move into my desktop. So the first thing I'm writing here, the first claim that I'm making tonight, is that Windows loves Python, and it is not really a thing that comes from Microsoft. Oh, what is going on? Let me just. Can I go into the internet? Yes, good. Okay, so Python, of course, supports can run on Windows just as it can on Mac and Linux. I know that most of the people that develop Python typically opt for other platforms but Windows, but I just want to remind you that it runs just as great on Windows as it does on any other platform. So if you go ahead, or if you go to the python.org website, you can go ahead and install Python for Windows, and I guess everybody knows that, so let's just skip that part. The second thing I want to show you then is that the integrated development environment, the IDE that Microsoft has called Visual Studio, it actually supports Python like beautifully, much better than any other IDE, I would actually say.
Better than that idle editor.
You think that's bullshit? Well, let me just try to make an argument, and we can have the discussion later, okay? So if you download Visual Studio 2013, which actually just became free in a community version, so you can go ahead and download that without paying a single dime for it. And you can also install extensions into it, and that's what I've done in my instance of Visual Studio here. So if I click File, New, Project, I get all the usual templates that I'm used to having when I'm working with Visual Studio. So first of all, I just want to ask, how many people actually work with Visual Studio in here?
Sadly, yes.
Sadly, yeah. Come on, you didn't say that. 4 people. Well, what do you actually develop? Are you a web developer or?
No, I'm backend developer.
Backend in Python? Or no, in C#? ASP.NET, something like that?
We have a C# engine, but I thank God I switched my job, so I'm going into Node.
Node, okay. Well, you know we have Node tools.
Yes, and we're using Azure for that, which is awesome. It's just, please don't come with all these things, because then I'm going to...
Okay, well, I'm happy that you like at least some of the stuff that we're doing.
I love Azure.
Okay, sounds good, sounds good. So let's try to spend more time inside of Azure than Visual Studio. Anyway, I happen to think that the Python tools for Visual Studio are pretty good. I've used PyCharm and some of the others, which are good too, but if you want to do like hardcore Django development with PyCharm, you can't really use the community edition. I think that's pretty apparent. So, but that you can do that with Visual Studio. You can download the community edition and install the Python tools, and you get support for all these types of web projects, whether that's Flask, Bottle, or Django, which is the thing I'm going to use in this case. By default, this is actually using the CPython runtime environment, just as you might be used to, but it can run on top of the .NET CLR as well, and that's what's called IronPython. Is everybody familiar with that, or
is that still alive?
It's kind of still alive, but obviously you see more support for CPython, right?
Yeah. Wasn't those things shut down about 4 years ago or something?
Yeah. I think it still has some community support out there.
Well, the guy that you guys hired for it, you basically just ran him off and said, please go away.
After the dynamic was implemented for C#.
Yeah. You had to get the PLR.
Then they had it.
Yeah.
Okay. I see that I have a very opinionated crowd here, so now.
You're also very opinionated, so of course you're gonna get it.
Okay. Let's get a battle, right? It's because I was disenclosure before I came in here. I should never have done.
No, you shouldn't.
Sorry. I made myself an enemy crowd. Anyway, let's just try to move on. So, when you create a Django project in here, you get something that at least I think is very nice. So let's just assume that everything that I say is my opinion. Let's just name this Django Web Project 3, and Visual Studio will start scaffolding everything that we need inside of this project. If you're not used to Visual Studio, I'll just give you a quick introduction once we get past this dialog box. So one of the things that the Python tools for Visual Studio can tell you is that you're actually requiring some packages, and these requirements come because this template or this project template is using Django. So that's in our requirements.txt file, and Visual Studio wants to resolve that dependency. So it says we can download and install these packages for you automatically, but we need to know whether you want to install them for just this project or for all of your projects. So people working on Linux and Mac, I'm sure you're used to working with virtual environments. Is that correct? Yeah. So you can do exactly the same thing in here. If there are packages that you don't want to install into your runtime environment, you can just create a virtual environment and install them there. So that's the same logic as on Linux and Mac. So let's just go ahead and set up a virtual environment here. I only have the Python 3.4 interpreter installed on my machine, but if I had any other, I could select that from this drop down. I'll create a folder called env inside of my project, and I'll just say go ahead and download and install these packages. So I can do that, and assuming that the internet connection is okay, it should not take so long. Well, is there something wrong? Well, anyway, what it does now is what you would expect it to do. It opens up that requirements.txt file that we have over here in our Solution Explorer. By default, there's just Django in there. So the only thing that this project depends on is Django. And it will then go and resolve that dependency. I believe it also downloads the pip and I think the setup tools as well. So they will be packages that are installed inside of your virtual environment. And from your Solution Explorer over here to the right, you can open up the node called env over here, and you'll see all of the packages installed into your virtual environment. While this is downloading, I don't know, I think my internet connection is not superb, but while this is going, let's just take a look at what's inside of our Solution Explorer. So if you've worked with a C# or any other project type inside of Visual Studio, you might be familiar to the nodes that are in here. You did some ASP.NET development, or? No?
.NET for 7 years. So
okay, you know it. I just wanted to see if there are some people in the room. Anyway, we can see that it's now finished, and we've downloaded Django version 1.7.5 and also pip and the setup tools. We can also see that there's something we should be doing before we actually start this thing, and that's to synchronize our database. this should not be like unfamiliar to you if you've used Django on any other environment. So let's just try and do that as the first thing to do. When we install the Python tools of Visual Studio, we see that we get this integration in here. So normally when we right-click the project node, we just get options such as build, rebuild, clean, and all that. We normally don't get Python unless it's a Python project, but it is. So we can go ahead and say we want to synchronize the database. And as it can be seen over here in our Solution Explorer, we have a SQLite database inside of the project. It asks me to provide a user. Let's just do that quickly. Email address. I'll give it password 1 tester. That. So that should be done. And now, because everything has been set up for me already, there's nothing else that I need to do other than clicking this beautiful button up here. Well, I need to build it. Let's do that. And now it starts up a web server running locally on my machine. And please note one thing here that's different from the usual workflow when you develop Python apps, and that is I didn't write a freaking single line of command line code here, right? I just used the GUI, the graphical user interface of Visual Studio, to set all of this up. So if you love your terminal, that's great, you can still use that, but if you're not too confident with it, or if you can't remember all the commands that you need to fire off, you get a lot of support out of the box from Visual Studio here. So this is how a standard Django app looks inside of when you create it from Visual Studio. It's built with Twitter Bootstrap, and it just contains some standard information that you can then remove and edit yourself. It also has the Django auth system in it, so I can log in with the user I just created. And that didn't work. Why didn't that? Username. Wasn't that right? I think it was this. Let me just see. Can I not type? Is that the reason why?
Wasn't the username without the A at the end? Or
could be. Anyway, this is not the point. This is not the point. It's just to say that this actually it works like just as you would expect it. I want to show you a little more of the support that you actually get from Visual Studio. So let's stop debugging here. And what should I start with? Let's actually take a look at the views that we have. So by default, it creates a home view for the root of the site, and it creates a contact view, and it creates also a view for the about page. And let's try and set a breakpoint in here. So let's say that once we hit the home page, we'll just set a breakpoint with inside of this method. So once again, if we run it up, we'll have to rebuild. So immediately it hits the breakpoint, and we can then expect the request. Just like this is this is the experience that you normally get from Visual Studio, and that you would expect from Visual Studio if you use this a lot, whether you're developing in Python or C# or Visual Basic.NET or JavaScript or whatever. You expect to get this type of code inspection. And even though Python is not strongly typed, which is normally an assumption for an IDE to really be able to help you when you develop, Visual Studio is intelligent enough to interpret the Python code that I've written here, and then allow me to reason about the code just as I am here. So I received this request, I can expand that, and I can see the cookies that were sent with it. I can see, well, this was a GET request, right? And it didn't really have any query parameters with it, but if I had, then I could inspect them here as well. I can then step through that code, and I can just notice how the yellow arrow here is moving down, and if I have to debug something, then I have really granular control of what a specific part of the code will be executed at what time, And if something then breaks, let's say here, then I could just stop before that and see, okay, what does the request actually contain, and what might have been the reason for why my app did not work, right? When you're developing Python apps in Sublime Text, you don't get this type of development, right? I think that's obvious. Let's just continue from here. Let's actually stop debugging again.
One question: can't you update the values that you see there when you are debugging?
Do you have the REPL?
So if I were to, if you had some value that you wanted to change, like at runtime.
Debugger, right?
So I'm actually, let's try and do that. I haven't used that feature very much.
You should be able to intermediate window if it's implemented correctly.
Yeah. So what do you think? Let's see if there's. So if we wanted to change that.
Yes.
So I think you can. Yeah. I think you can do that and then continue on from there. Yeah. So I just want to show you another thing, because pip is sort of native to, pip is sort of native when you're developing Python applications, at least Django, right? Just like NuGet is when you're developing ASP.NET MVC applications, or NPM is when you're developing Node, or whatever. So that's also why pip was resolved as a dependency, even though we did not state it here in our requirements. But if we were to depend on another dependency, say Azure, then we could just go ahead and write that in here, and I could then right-click my my environment node here, and I could say go and install everything that's in requirements.txt. Again, coming back to not having to type in stuff into the command line all the time, you could use the graphical user interface, right? The Azure package here, which will let's see, do we have, well, I think it's working on installing it. It should be at least. Yeah, it says that. Yeah. So the Azure package here gives you an SDK for many of the services inside of Azure, and one of them being blob storage, and I'll give you an example of that. But it's not required to have this package installed inside of your Django application just to run Django inside of Azure. And now that we're speaking of Azure, and since you're loving Azure down there, I think we should take a look at what it is. So I'll first of all show you the new portal, and then I'll show you the old portal. So if I go to portal.azure.com, I'll have to log in, and this is a preview of the new portal, the new web-based portal that you can manage Azure from. It's still in preview, but it will be released as the primary portal soon, but it's not yet. And as you can see, some of the stuff really hasn't been loaded. I think there's some CSS missing here. This is not looking as good as it should. Anyway, let's just take a look at the old portal then. Which is placed at manage.windowsazure.com, and from in here you can manage basically everything that Azure can do. You can also interface with Azure from the command line. There's cross-platform tools for that, from PowerShell, from APIs, but I'll just show you how to work with it from the browser here. So as I said before, Azure really covers a ton of different things, and you can see all of these things by scrolling down in this list of services here. So we have hosted websites, virtual machines, mobile services, which is sort of a package that covers a lot of things that you might want to use if you're building mobile apps. We've got cloud services, which is sort of a thing in between websites and virtual machines. Don't worry too much about that. I don't think they're as relevant any longer. At least not as relevant as they used to be. We've got hosted SQL Server databases up here. We've got blob storage, where you can place big, large, what is it called? What is blob? Binary large object, right? Table storage, we have that in there, which is a key value store hosted in Azure. We've also got a queue in there. We've got HD Insight, which is a hosted Hadoop cluster if you're into machine learning. We've got... Sorry?
Way more than Hadoop.
It's way more than Hadoop. Well, that's what people understand. It's actually a distribution of Hadoop made by Hortonworks, and it actually includes a lot of the components that you would associate with Hadoop.
So Storm and Kafka.
Yeah, right.
Which
So
is probably going forward more relevant.
So I see we've got a person that's got a lot of experience with Hadoop down there. But let's just take a look at it. You can spin up a Hadoop cluster. If you don't have experience with this, it's basically just it's a cluster of a lot of machines put in together in a network that allows you to run some very large workloads up there, typically related to some kind of data. And as you said, we've got Storm running up here. We've got a more traditional Hadoop cluster. We've also got one with HBase installed. And actually, you can also run Spark up here, Apache Spark. That's not available through this GUI here, but you can install Spark on top of Hadoop and really not use Hadoop for much else than just being a distributed file system. But let's not spend our time too much with that. We've got something called media services where you can create channels and you can upload the different types of media and then pre-process that type of media, for example, a video file, to different formats that you might want to serve to different types of clients, right? We've got a service bus that covers both an event hub and a notification hub and support for messaging. We've got this Visual Studio Online, which I'll dive more into just in a little bit. We've got cache based on Redis. Does people have experience with Redis here? Yeah, at least one guy. BizTalk services, as you mentioned. Maybe that's where you want to be working the most of the time.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, you like that. Yeah.
Sounds like a big paycheck.
Yeah. Recovery services.
What about COBOL?
Yeah, COBOL. Actually, I was reading on version 2.dk today that COBOL is the new black. Well,
it's the last thing I'll study.
We've got tons of stuff more. I think from the rest of the list here, I think API management might be one of the things that would be more interesting to web developers. It's sort of the thing that you can put in front of your own REST API, and then you can you can do many things with it, but one of the things you can do with it is monetize your API. So let's say that you'd gathered a lot of data, maybe you processed that in Hadoop. You took the output of that and you made that publicly available through an API, but you would want to charge people for the use of your API. Instead of having to manage all of that on your own, and instead of having to write the documentation and make sort of a documentation page on your own, you can use API management, put that in front of your own REST API, and then control who can get access, how much they should be charged if they want to access your API, give them documentation, give them sort of like consoles where they can test your API and stuff like that. It's a really neat thing if you're a web developer. We've got a hosted Active Directory up here. And yeah, we've got tons of stuff. But let's just focus on what's interesting.
Can you Google your menu items so we can find them?
Google my menu items. What do you mean? So because there's so many, or
That's actually a plus.
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. Okay. Anyway.
There's also a button all items.
Yeah.
Don't click.
Yeah. So as you see, it covers many things, and maybe just to relate each of these things to the three categories we had before: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Well, you would say that websites is a platform as a service offering, whereas virtual machines is more of a infrastructure as a service offering. Mobile service, again, is a platform as a service offering. And we do in Microsoft actually differentiate between these things, but it's not apparent when you sit here and work in the portal. Anyway, let's just move on to websites. So what is a website? It's It's a hosted server that runs different types of, it has different types of runtime environments installed. Of course, .NET being included, but also PHP, Python, and Java. So from in here, you can create a website, and I'll do that, and I'll actually do that from the gallery. If you were just interested in hosting your blog up here, and maybe you don't want to spend too much time on coding it, you just want to use some standard blog system that's out there, you could do that. You could maybe choose WordPress, click on that, move on and install the required MySQL database, also hosted as a platform as a service, and click through, and just in a matter of seconds you would have a blog up and running without having to write a single line of code or uploading any files to this host. We're not going to start a WordPress blog here. Instead, we'll start a Django site, and that's also a template in here. So we can click next here, and we'll have to give this a URL, and I think I'll call it Python Meetup Demo. And I'll have to create a web hosting plan for this. I think I'll dive a little more into what that is in just a little second. But let's just now choose this web hosting plan that's hosted in West Europe, and it's free. So let's click OK to that. I will now go ahead and provision my website on a free server, and there are 4 types of hosting plans for these kinds of websites in Azure. We have the free ones, which are free, of course. They will run as applications alongside other applications from other customers on the same server. Then we have the shared hosting plan, where you still share the server, but you get or we allow you to put an SSL certificate or a TLS certificate on your endpoint. We allow you to put a custom domain on your site and not just use the standard thing you get, something.azurewebsites.net. Then the next step is the basic web hosting plan, where you get your own virtual machine that runs your website, and you also.
Isn't that standard?
Sorry?
Isn't that standard?
We've actually changed that. So it's okay. So it's basic now, and you can do manual scaling. And now standard, what you can get there is features such as automatic scaling, and that's the only web hosting plan that supports automatic scaling. So we can see that this is being created right now. You can let's just give it a second. I don't know if it might have been created, but maybe I did not get the response back in my browser. I think the internet I'm at is a little slow, maybe.
So could you load balance behind a cloud service or basic?
The load balancer is on.
Because that used to be standard.
Yeah, I think.
Still that?
I actually don't remember. Let's just take a look at that. Yeah.
Oh, you're probably hijacking this system.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah. So the scaling, you can do that from in here. Once it loads, I think the internet connection is a little bit slow, but let's just hope it goes through. Yeah. So from here, you basically can't do anything. If you choose a shared site, you can put a custom domain and a custom SSL certificate on it. From the basic, you get your own instance. And then, as I said, with a standard, you get this, you can set your website up to auto-scale. So just as I showed on the slide before, we can elastically scale our website, or the resources are dedicated for our websites, based on the usage. And a measure for that usage might be the CPU. So if we're getting a lot of traffic, we should see the CPU rise. And if we see the CPU rise by a certain threshold, for example, I don't know, maybe 50%, you can also type it in, 50%, then maybe I would instantiate another instance here, and I would maybe set up to 6 instances, let's say that.
And each instance would have 1 core and 1 point.
Yeah, you can also change what instance size it should be here. So there are these 3 options. And so this allows you to not having to worry about Do you guys know that the radio talk host, the radio show host, Peter Feldtoft from Monte Carlo? Yeah. Well, anyway, he was very popular on DRP3. He released, or he was working with this web shop and made some sneakers, custom-made sneakers that they launched on this web shop. And the first day, because this guy is so popular, the website or the web shop broke down. Right. This would never have happened if they had hosted it in Azure. They should have done that.
And given the
Or
user
AWS,
details.
or Google Engine, or.
Well, Azure, right? I think you are my enemy right here.
Hold on. Very black and white.
Yeah.
Is there similar examples of websites being hosted on Azure that actually experienced that and didn't break down?
So
Where did it?
well,
No, they all broke down.
Well, let's not talk about if you've been following the recent status of Azure. We've had some issues the past 24 hours. Let's not get into that, right? Okay. We've also have some linked resources here. So when you build a website, just like I showed before inside of Visual Studio, we typically depend on some other things like a database, right? So it's natural for us to think that this website we just created might depend on another resource, a database, and we can create that from in here. We can either link to an existing resource, but we can also create a new one. A SQL database is a SQL Server database. We can create a MySQL database from in here, and also a storage account in where we could place our flat files. Let's say we wanted to use MySQL for Django. I know that a lot of people do that. What's actually happening is that we're using an application from the Azure Marketplace. So on top of all these services that Microsoft offers through Azure, third-party vendors, they can build applications on top of Azure and then sell these through the Azure Marketplace. And there is a company called ClearDB that has developed a MySQL platform as a service offering that you can buy through the Azure Marketplace. So even though we don't, as Microsoft, host that on our own, you can use, or you can get that from one of the third-party vendors. This guide integrates that in here, so you don't have to actually go into the marketplace and get it. You just have to say that you agree to the terms, don't read them, right? And then give it a name and say where you want to place it. Since our website is placed in Western Europe or in Amsterdam, it makes sense to place that at the same place. You click OK, and it would start provisioning. And
so what's the price then?
Yeah, so the price,
money, right?
It does. I think the one it actually creates here is such a small database that it's free. But if you want to scale that up, there's a price to that, and that's actually, it's not actually Microsoft. Well, it's Microsoft charging it, but we're charging it on behalf of ClearDB because that's the third-party vendor that has developed MySQL here.
Couldn't you just host it on a VM?
You could do that as well. So you could create your own virtual machine, install Postgres, SQL, or whatever you want. But it sort of breaks a little bit this very nice.
No, but this is exactly what brings the power. And you actually have the customizability.
Yeah, that's right. So I think. So the cool thing about the cloud really is that it caters to any type of need, and if you want to run your own VM, you can do that. And we've got some crazy sizes. We just announced some really huge VMs with hundreds of gigabytes of RAM, for example. So if you want to put your database there, you can do that. If you want the easy option, you do what I just did here. So now I have a database that I could be working with. And I think I want to go through all of these tabs here. I'm just thinking of what order I should go through. But I think actually the first thing I'll do is, maybe the first thing we should do is take a look at the site. Yeah, so I think we should, I just want to say, as I said before, we support the .NET framework, PHP, Java, and Python on here. Let's just save these settings, and then we should be able to go to Python meetup demo.azurewebsites.net. And we should see this blank or this vanilla Python app here. I think because I just saved it, so it might be.
Well, maybe it's your outages.
I think the internet is is not working. Sir? Yeah, I think. Well, at least it got the title back. I think there's something wrong with the internet here. Well, while that's loading, let's take a look at the code that's actually running this website. You can connect your Azure website to a source repository, allowing you to integrate, well, to do that continuous integration and continuous delivery all the way from your source repository to your production sites. And you can do that either from Visual Studio Online, which I still have to get into. Let's do that in a little bit. You can also connect to a local Git repository running on your machine. You can connect to a GitHub repository, a Dropbox account. I don't know who would do that, but anyway. Bitbucket, Codeplex, and also an external repository. Let's just connect this code to a local Git repository, and we'll just say okay. And since we created this website with the Django template already in it, it already contains some stuff. So instead of pushing up the solution I made before, let's try and clone down what is in here. I think I'll just open up my Git shell.
If you want to go with the whole GUI thing, shouldn't you be using a GUI?
Okay. Okay, so let's go with the GUI thing. So we'll connect we'll create a new local repository by cloning one. So we can do that from here. And well, anyway, you're right. I should do it from here if I wanted to. But I still want to say that just because these GUI tools are here to support us, we can still use the command line. In fact, many of the things, or many of the commands you can do from the GUI are actually just commands down to the command line. So yeah, let's try and clone this repository, and let's choose a reasonable place to stick this repository into. I think I'll put it in here, and let's, oh crap. Let's create it here. Python meetup demo, and I'll say okay, and let's clone this. I'll have to enter my credentials, which you can set you can set them by resetting your deployment credentials, but yeah, you basically set your deployment credentials, and you can then clone the repository. So if the internet connection is okay, this clone should start. Yeah, and we've got this repository here. There's already a .sln file in here. Typical for Visual Studio.
Isn't that going away basically with SEM?
Sorry?
Isn't that basically going away with SEM?
With Windows 10, or what do you?
Studio on the next version.
So.
Or whatever it's called, 15 or whatever.
So if you've been following the development of ASP.NET, we are. That's exactly right. We don't depend on .sln files or .kproj files, or we don't depend on these files. That's a big thing for people. Anyway, it comes in here. It's still a very nice thing to have. And even in the new version, we'll still have these files because it supports Visual Studio. It's just not required. So if we open up this solution, we see that we have very much the same thing as when we created the project from file new project. So there's not much of a difference here, honestly. Maybe there's just this web config, which hasn't been downloaded for some reason. Those are the only two files, and we can actually take a look at those from inside of Azure. So one of the things that I wanted to enable before, but I waited with doing it, is the edit in Visual Studio Online. So Visual Studio Online is an umbrella for many things. It's not an online version of Visual Studio. Rather, it's features running in the cloud that supports your work in Visual Studio. So, for example, a Git repository, a TFS repository, that's running in Visual Studio Online. You get load testing in there. So you could define a load test project, or you could make a load test project, fire off a lot of traffic against the target, maybe a Django app that you built. And then you could sort of see the results, see how well your app responds to a lot of load. You can do that from inside of Visual Studio Online. There's also a build server in there, and you've got all these Scrum tools. You can make backlogs and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very nice for collaborating in teams. But it also has this other thing, and that's the thing that I'm enabling now by pressing on. I'll save this, and it's the editor that Visual Studio Online has. It's a very simple HTML-based editor, so it's an editor in the browser, and it allows you to edit files that you might have running either inside of your source repository or inside of your Azure website. So now, because I enabled this feature, which by the way is still in preview, it's still in beta, you could say, I can now click on this link, edit in Visual Studio Online, and it opens up and it shows me all of the files that that this Django project created. I think there's something wrong. Didn't it load the CSS, or what is happening here?
It's not done yet. It's still loading.
Yeah, I think it looks like the HTML was loaded, but the CSS wasn't, or something. I don't know what's wrong with that. Anyway, we can see exactly the same files in here as we had inside of our Visual Studio Solution Explorer. So just to give you an example, I could open up one of my templates, or maybe let's actually change the title of the home page, and let's say Python plus Django running on Azure. And I don't actually have to save that, it auto saves, right? I could then, let's change our layout here. So instead of Django, we actually write out our title here. It's saved. And now when I should refresh here, I think there's something with the CSS not loading, because it looks like all of the HTML was loaded but not the CSS for some reason. I don't know what's going on with that. Anyway, you should see the title has now changed here. So don't worry about the CSS. I think there's something wrong with the internet connection for that, but you get the idea. You can live edit files from inside of the Visual Studio Online editor.
How does that work with the Git integration?
Yeah, it's not working with the Git integration. So when if I were to make a change in here and commit that and push it to my Azure website, it gets overwritten. So, but it's good if you have maybe a simple HTML site, or if you need to fix something really quickly and you can't, maybe you don't have access to a machine with Visual Studio installed. Like, it's good for these types of things. Let me just show you that it's actually got. So it's got. Do you see that it's got these nice features where it can, if you create a tag, it can close them, and it's got syntax highlighting, as you see inside of CSS files. Yeah, here you get this. You can see what color you're actually writing here, which is really nice. So if I were to change this to black, well, you get black. So things like that, right? It's a really nice editor online. Let's move back to some of the other things that it has here. I really want to show you this part here, web jobs. This is one of I really love this feature. It's really small, but it's also very, very cool. So when you run a website, and for example, a Django app, and it maybe depends on a MySQL database, as we added before, it might also need to do something in the background that doesn't require the user's interaction. Maybe if you were creating a photo sharing site, and you would allow users to upload very large photos, you might want to rescale those to different formats. That's a thing that you could run as a web job, and it doesn't really require the user's interaction, because once he's uploaded the picture, well, you need to do something on the back end, and that could be a web job. So I'll show you how a web job works. I'll write a very, very simple Python, a very, very simple Python script. And in fact, the script I thought of is just something that will count from 1 to 1,000. So running through a loop, right? And we could do that by saying for I in a range from 1000 to 0 to 1000. And we could then, I need to, well, let's actually see what's happening here. We get these red squiggly lines, right? Let me try to zoom this up a little bit. So this is not just a stupid editor that's highlighting what we're doing. As I'm writing in, or as I'm typing my code, Visual Studio tries to interpret that and then give me some errors. So it gives me a red squiggly line up here, and the new line symbol, which is here, was unexpected by Visual Studio. And why is that? Because I need a colon, right? And then here, if I were to type print I, then I get an error. And why do I get an error?
Because it's a Python 3 and that's a function.
Exactly. Yeah. So this used to be valid in, or it is valid in Python 2, right? But it's not valid in Python 3. So now this is a function. So you can actually change your environment or your interpreter by going into Tools, Options, scroll down to Python Tools, and then click on Environment Options, and you can choose your default environment. I only have Python 3.4, but if I had Python 2.7, then I could write Python 2.7 code, and I get the help for that there. But I think this is a really nice feature. So let's try and save that. Maybe I'll save it in, where will I save it? Maybe I'll create a folder called MISC here. And let's just call this very important job, right? So, well, it basically just runs through a range from 0 to 1000 and prints out the index that it's at, right? It's pretty simple. The reason why I'm just building such a short program is because it serves the purpose. It's doing something that could take some time, and it doesn't need a user's interaction, right? I'm also using the print function because there's something very nice that I want you to see in a second. So let's try and save that. Let's open up File Explorer. Let's go into this MISC folder. I'll just create a zip file of this because that's what I need to upload when I create a new job here. So I'll open this and I'll upload this zip file. I have to give it a name. I could give the same name, but it doesn't really matter. And then it asks me, how do you want to run this job? It could either run continuously, and that would make sense if it was some sort of continuous process that maybe listens on a queue that I might have running somewhere else. And every time something is coming into that queue, that might be a message a message saying there's new pictures that needs to be processed, right? I would want this process to run continuously and not shut down. I could also run it on a schedule, and I can define this schedule on my own. I think, yeah, so there's the schedule definer. Come on, internet, show me the schedule. You can define, okay, I want this to run every night at 12 a.m., for example. Or I want it to run every Tuesday and every Thursday at 4, or whatever it might be. That might make sense in some scenarios. I don't know why that's not working. Let's just try and do this again. Very important job. I could also say I would want to run this on demand, which means that it just runs when I click start, and that's the type that I want to run here. So it's been uploaded, and I get this very nice page here that shows me the logs of this of running this job. And let's try and run this. Let's just take a look at the page. So there's no recent web job runs here, but if I click run once, it will start, and from in here we should automatically see that it would be updated. We see, and we now have one job running. It shouldn't take too long to complete this. In fact, it already did. So we see that it's just writing out the numbers from 0 to 1000. It's not a big deal, but I think it should give you some inspiration as to what you can use this for, right? Okay. Yeah. So I think I'll wrap up because we've We've been talking for almost 1 hour, and I don't want to bore you to death, but I just want to show you Visual Studio Online. I've been speaking a little of it. So this is where I can create repositories. Let's try and create one. I'll call it Python Meetup Demo, and I'll select Git rather than Team Foundation version control. And it doesn't take too long to create this. You can select some different templates, and what that gives you, I told you that you get these tools for working together in teams with Scrum, and there's like a process template for that. We'll take a look at that in a second. Yeah, we can navigate to this project, and we basically have 4 tabs up here. We have code, which is a repository, work, which is where you can place your backlog, both the features you want to implement and the bugs and stuff like that. You get a build controller and all the build definitions you might have, and you can do testing in here, and that's specifically, well, one of the most interesting features that exist in Visual Studio Online is load testing. Now let's try and do something with our website here. Instead of connecting it to a local Git repository, we can connect this to our Visual Studio Online repository. And then whenever I would push in new code into my Visual Studio Online repository, it would build that, and then the Azure website would pick that up and take the code and deploy that. Now you might not want to do that straight into your production slot. So there's an option to actually add deployment slots here. And what we typically do, we have some projects in my team running in Azure websites. We just add one deployment slot. We call that staging. And whenever we push in new code, it's being built automatically. And if everything passes, then it's being shipped to this deployment slot. And then I can do my test there. And if I'm satisfied with how things are looking, I could change my deployment slot or my staging slot to be my production slot. And the only thing that's actually happening there is that you just change the pointer. You say, oh, this slot over here was before the staging. Now I'm switching over. So the change happens almost instantaneously.
But isn't the cooler thing now the A/B testing thing that is coming on Azure, where you can do like potential?
Yeah.
Is that way cooler than that?
Well, it's a different thing, I would say.
But you can do that and way more.
Yeah. Well, I'm starting with the basics here, right? Yeah. We obviously have an Azure fan here, and I'm happy for that. But I'm just trying to show sort of the basic features. So.
When you're testing, you would probably want to pick a snapshot so the website doesn't change the second before you switch over.
Yeah. So let's say that you got in. Let's say you had your code pushed into the staging slot, and you would do your testing, and you would be satisfied. You switch over, and you find that there's an error in the code that you just pushed. You can move back as quickly as you moved over there by just changing the pointer back. So you get this option to swap your deployment slots.
So you can automate that, and the other one, just do it if you get an error count that is above 100,
yeah,
automatically roll back.
Oh, that's what you meant. Okay.
For example.
Yeah, true. That is true. True. So that's one of the newer features, right? I just want to show you how you can connect your Visual Studio Online repository. So let's try and connect the one we just created. It's waiting to authorize. Come on. Accept, and you can do this. It works just the same way with Visual Studio. So let's choose Python Meetup Demo here and click OK. So it's linking the project, and it's also creating a build definition for me over here, which it should show up in just a few seconds. And the build definition came right there. It's a definition of what has to be, or what is being built here, and what code is being shipped over to the Azure website once it's been built. And it works just as well. It's not much different from integrating your Azure website to a local repository. Now it's just running in Visual Studio Online. Okay, I think we're nearing. We're close to the hour that was that I thought I would spend on this. Let me just wrap up. I've got some more boring slides. Well, what more do we have here that's interesting? Well, we just have the conclusion. So, as I said before, is this a love story between Lady and the Tramp? And in which case, like, if it is, like, who's the street dog and who's the upper class dog? Is it Python? Is it Microsoft? Well, I'll leave you up. I'll let you decide that. But at least I hope that you you got convinced that Python runs really cool with it. Or it runs really well inside of the Microsoft ecosystem, whether that's just Windows or it's Visual Studio or it's Visual Studio Online or it's Azure. We have full support for that. If you want to get started with this, I would highly encourage you to check out azure.com. You can sign up for a free trial that includes 1,150 kroners, I believe. And for that, you can run a heck of a lot, especially if you just spin up free websites because, well, they're free, right? If you have an MSDN account, you can use that as well because you get access to Azure through your MSDN benefits. And also, if you work for a startup, if you have an idea for a side project that you might want to start, then I would encourage you to check out Microsoft BizSpark, which responds with an error 500. Let me just check this out. Yeah, so Microsoft BizSpark is this program for startups or people who have side projects, where you basically get 5 MSDN Ultimate subscriptions, and each of these subscriptions include $150 of Azure usage per month, and membership of BizSpark lasts for 3 years. So if you have an idea for a side project, you don't have to it doesn't have to be your full-time job. It might be something that you've been thinking of building for a while and you want to build it up, and maybe you can use some of the benefits that comes with Azure. Well, I think you should sign up for BizSpark. I think it will be relevant to a lot of people here. Yeah, so there's that. And then we have a Danish newsletter, which is actually a high-quality newsletter. We're getting this guy to write it for us, and he's really good at writing. And you can sign up for that if you want to. The link to sign up is aka.ms/nyhedsbrev, and it's obviously in Danish. So that's it. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
You showed the ultimate version at the beginning. What's the difference? This express version, which is free.
So you meant the first Azure portal? Yeah. So I showed the first Azure portal in the beginning. And that's what we're moving to. Not all of these things you can do in the old portal are available in the new portal yet, but there are some things that are available in the new portal that are not in the old portal. And I don't know why it's looking this way. I think I do have a problem with style sheets today. I don't know what the heck is going on. Anyway, there are things such as where can I find? Where is it? I think where is it? Yeah. So one of the new offerings that is coming with Azure is search, where you get sort of a search as a service offering. It's based on Lucene and Elasticsearch, but it's much more than that. We built a lot of things around that. You can deploy that from in here, but that's not available through the old portal, for example. So that's the difference. Honestly, it looks really nice. I don't know what the heck is going on with my CSS loading, but that's what we're moving to.
We're used to Emacs, so.
Yeah, well, good. This is much better. At least you have some icons here, right?
Også har squiggly, så der også har haft 10 år.
Sorry, can you say
Is there a plan to support other search engine? A few years ago, I was evaluating fast.
Yeah.
And it was amazing.
Yeah.
Planning to do everything here.
Yeah. So I think you're referring to the fast server built in Norway, which is a part of the SharePoint project, actually.
Yes.
So that's not here, and I don't think it will move in here. Yeah, I think I'll just stop my